an interesting question whether you want to put your kids into coding or not. But we are going to go live. For everyone that is joining us today, we were already chit-chatting a lot about basically everything. We've kind of covered it all already, from AI to coding to what the future of tax will hold for us. But welcome everyone.
Thanks very much for joining. Goodbye. Right?
Exactly. Welcome everyone to another exciting Fonoa webinar. I guess the topic today is, of course, in-house strategies for indirect tax compliance. I realize that's quite the mouthful, so we will probably break that down into something much more practical and tangible. Luckily, we have two great guests today that are going to help us with that, industry experts from obviously great companies. Let me quickly introduce you both, but we will, of course, have the opportunity for yourselves to give a bit more color. But very quickly, Liz Gallagher on my bottom. I'm not sure where she is on your side, but head of indirect tax, EMEA, of course, at Meta. Very well known in the industry, and I want to say, Liz, I think that most people really appreciate your LinkedIn activity as well. Very informative. And then we have Stef van Heugden. I hope I pronounced that Dutch enough, Stef.
Yeah, very good.
Indirect taxes globally for Adyen, the famous payment processor, of course, that has probably changed the industry or the payment services industry a lot in the last decade or so. We're equally lucky to have our own Alexander Kobakidze. Most people know him as Eiko. Lucky because he just became a first-time father, so we had to pull him away from his duties and joys of being a fresh parent.
You dragged me away from all of the diaper changes.
Look, at some point,
I really want to go back.
You cannot stare at the baby for that long. Before we begin today, guys, just for those people, because we always have new joiners, even though we have a lot of people that are coming to all of our webinars. If you haven't joined us before, Eiko, always helpful to give a couple of housekeeping notes from your end, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're using a platform called Livestorm. You are very much encouraged to ask questions and interact. You can interact in multiple different ways. If you want to ask a question, it's in the bottom right-hand corner. You'll see a quick question tab. The point to make here is if you want to ask a question without anybody else seeing it, then use that button. If you want to ask a little bit more openly in the chat, on the bottom right-hand side, you can ask a question. Let me just type something saying hello, so everybody should be able to see that. You can use in chat and some questions there. But if you want to be very minimalist but also respond, you can also respond using emojis. I think they will be enabled for this session. Shock, horror, are they? Yes, they are. Absolutely. There we go. And that's about it. Rob, have I missed anything?
I don't think so. By now, you're an expert on the platform, unlike me still. But no, that's probably it. And by the way, if we do see questions, or you probably in the chat that are interesting, please just call them out and we will address them with our guest today. But before we begin, I think maybe helpful to just set the stage a little bit, put the topic in a bit of perspective. Like I mentioned, it's quite a mouthful. How we think about this, and I think everyone today, hopefully on the line, will agree. We really believe that the future of indirect tax is very different than it is today. It's already evolving rapidly and is moving towards what we call an era of real-time compliance. Now, Liz just mentioned very rightfully so that let's see how long that will take before we get there. And also there's a bunch of road bumps and hurdles along the way probably. But ultimately, I think everyone agrees that that's the direction that things are moving towards. And that's important in the context of this topic, indirect tax compliance, because if you think about digital reporting, e-invoicing at the most granular transactional level in near real time, that automatically means that there's no room for manual interference. And thus, all of those companies that today, which I think is 95% or more, have a lot of manual processes and work involved in their indirect tax compliance cycles, will have to figure out, like, okay, how do those two elements match up? If I report in real time at a transactional level, but I have my periodic filings that I need to file, that kind of like are a reconciliation of that. How does that work? And how can I prepare today to get ahead of things? And this is why I think it's super helpful, Stef and Liz, thanks for joining us, to have you both, because you and your companies are really front runners in that respect. And I think we as a tax community all can really learn a lot from that and be inspired, basically. So without further ado, Liz, Stef, maybe you could both share a little bit of your background and how you are or have been exposed to the beautiful world of indirect tax compliance so far. And maybe, Liz, ladies go first, so maybe we can start with you.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be back.
Yeah.
Indirect tax compliance. Okay, so I'm so old that I used to do paper returns in the Big Four for many years. I moved to Meta about 8 years ago. And one thing I would say is people will assume, which actually we talked about as a group earlier, that Meta must be this like high tech, hugely efficient, tax transformation everywhere, IT must land into VAT compliance. And that hasn't been our journey. So if you're someone who's like, I'm still really manual, how am I going to get here? We've taken that journey over the last 5 years. So it has taken us 5 years to get to a place where we're probably comfortable, but we know we can do a lot more. And we can probably do a lot more because of the technology that's coming at us. So I do think this is something, if you took this as a career choice, well done, because I think VAT is a must-have and not a nice-to-have. I think it's a really funky place to be. Anyone who meets me knows that I'm a complete sado and a complete VAT nerd. Passion for tax technology, and also it's beneficial for me because I love the policy side of it. So I get to see at the OECD level, what's happening, what are the EU Commission thinking about, and I think the two pieces are really, really interlinked. So I'll start there and I'll hand over to Stefan.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Steph, I'm from the Netherlands, and since I did my master in tax law, I knew that I wanted to work in it. And I started my career as a tax lawyer in a big law firm, and I totally felt out of place, and I thought maybe the tax world is not it for me. I filled in manually invoices in an Excel sheet for the VAT return, so I know how manual it can be, but it was for smaller companies. But I also did a lot of advisory work, but especially the world where I was working in was not matching my personality. So then I traveled through Latin America, and I thought I'm going to leave the tax world until people told me about Adyen. And when I had the conversations with people from the tax team at Adyen, which is a very global team, very international, operating only from the Amsterdam office, I became really enthusiastic again to continue my career in tax. So I've been working now almost 2 years at Adyen, and as a fintech, there are of course a lot of different types of sources that we can have. We can get invoices for example, schemes, Visa and MasterCard, that are super complicated and hard to automatically get into systems. So it's very difficult in terms of tax and technology. But I love thinking about it. I'm very optimistic usually about it. But I've seen almost any of our VAT returns globally and filed them. So a lot of experience there.
It's a fun world. Steph, when we spoke earlier, you even mentioned that you're doing a lot of US stuff, which is unorthodox, I would say. Most international or like non-US tax VAT schooled experts are not typically dealing with US sales tax, of course, which is interesting. Yeah, can we maybe just double click on you both a little bit in terms of like organizational makeup, remit in terms of indirect tax compliance? I mean, like what is the size of the problem for you? Are you dealing with like one return or 1,000, and what is like the team size? Maybe is there anything that you can share there, just to give people a bit of perspective?
So my team manage about 3,000 returns a year. We have 475 VAT registrations, so it's quite a magnitude of returns. We only look after Europe, Middle East, and Asia. We do support the Asia team a little bit so the majority or the maximum amount of returns that we look after is remote selling, which many of you be aware of. So we have these simplified returns because we sell digital content into countries in the world. The benefit is they're simplified returns because you're only reporting in AOR. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, there's a big opportunity because it's just AOR, but that can be difficult too. Yes. Then the rest of them are small localized entities, but that's when you've got the general complexity that any company would have. AOR, AP, intercompany, and on and on and on. So massive footprint, substantial amount of returns with a lot of work to do, with a team of 6.
6 people, wow.
Yeah, we run an outsource model and it works quite well for us. So we do work with some of the big 4. And that's the choice we made as Meta, and I think it's working for us. So yeah, we rely on outsource partners a lot.
I think many people on the line today or online today, I have to say, will not even understand. Like more than 3,000, you said, right?
Yeah,
it's a lot.
It is a lot.
Steph, what about you?
Yeah, so for us, we are working with 11 people on all of our global tax matters. So that's both compliance and all the advisory. which can become quite complicated when you have financial products. But for the compliance, I think we have around 300, 400 returns per year. And that's managed by people on the side. So it's part of everyone's job. We don't have separate compliance managers specifically. But what makes it extra complicated in terms of compliance for us is all the tax reportings that are coming up now as well, which is totally different type of data, totally different type of working, but very extensive requirements. So that's a new addition to it that I didn't even count yet with all the VAT compliance.
And Steph, when you said that, I assume that you mean or think about things like CSOP, right?
Yeah, that's the biggest one. Yeah,
fun
going
stuff.
live this month. Yeah,
I mean that's in a way. I mean, maybe it's not like fully indirect tax, but it's also tax reporting, of course. In terms of that journey list that you were talking about earlier, from where you began to where you are now, I imagine for both of you, given the numbers that you work with, that there's probably a lot that you have optimized along the way, from data collection all the way to return finalization, submission even. In your experience, what are like the areas that traditionally, at least, were the most manual and were requiring the most resources?
Probably reconciliation. So if I start the journey, just to give a general overview.
Maybe that's helpful.
We built our own internal process management tools. So that was literally to have everything in one place. So that was built about 2018, rolled out late 18, early 19. Then we started looking at the process itself. And we had a little bit like Steph's talking about, where we had a lot of people in finance also supporting indirect tax, because at the time there was only 2 people in EMEA looking after VAT.
Wow.
And again, the team of 6 is looking after consulting and compliance. We don't just have a whole team looking after compliance. That's not the way we manage our business. So where we moved then was we started looking at, okay, how do we move to a better governance model, KPIs, and moving to what we called an outsourced COE model. So we started looking at, okay, if we look at a return and we categorize it, it's high risk, low, medium, for example, then we decide, okay, there's certain ones, these remote selling would be an example. There's not a huge risk on them. If the data is correct, which it should be, then you have a single rate of tax going on a single VAT return, and potentially that could be outsourced. So you're looking at, do you have the capability to outsource? That gave us a very high propensity to remove a lot of people from the process internally and give them back a value add job, and not something that realistically they probably weren't overly excited about. And I'm okay with them admitting that to me.
Yeah, makes sense.
There's a number of dashboards to allow them, particularly to do month end close. We do have a segregation on any kind of VAT reconciliation done at month end. Sits with finance, not with tax. But again, try to develop something. The main pain point we had with 3,000 returns is actually payment functionality. So in 2023, we built out an automated payment functionality. We believe that we're one of the first. There's not too many of us that have achieved it, but there was so many returns, and it wasn't like we were aiming to be the first. That's what it was. It wasn't. The pain point was so severe for Meta that we knew it was something we had to focus on, that we wanted to invest in. We believed we could do it. So now we have built a functionality where the authorization is through an automated approval process, goes into basically what we call our payout functionality, which is AP, and it generates an invoice which gets paid, but it has to be an accelerated payment because it's tax. And we've automated in Europe about 96% of our payments. We'll always have some that are manual, because you have bizarre situations. You need like a code, and you've 2 minutes to put into the code to make the payment. The benefit for someone like me is if I get to sit at that OECD level, and we get this opportunity, and it is fantastic, and I'm so privileged to be there. You get to meet these tax authorities now and say, this is best in class. Don't do any of those 10-second codes. We want to try and automate, US, be able to pay in US dollar, whatever it might be. But for us, this has been a journey. We see huge opportunity with Gen AI, with more automation, but like everything, it takes time. We couldn't do it in one go. We do one bit, and then we take a moment, we benchmark ourselves to see where we are, and then we move forwards again. So anyone who's listening to the call going, mother of God, she's light years ahead of me. Just, it's one step at a time. We didn't do this overnight.
By the way,
we couldn't.
Eiko, remind me to put a pin on this from a currency perspective, because what Liz said is very interesting, right? We would love to pay in USD, but unfortunately, that's not always possible. So I'm very curious to double click a little bit on like how do you actually deal with that conversion or currency conversion kind of like issue, especially when in some of these countries the timing is super relevant, right? And if it goes wrong or if it's 1 day late, India is becoming problematic. So Steph, what about you? How are you guys doing, and where do you come from, and what were like the massive pain points to begin with?
Yeah, so I think we are a very young company. So, and we grew very big very quickly. So I think a few years before I started, a lot of it was manual. So we had to start completely from zero. And I think what helped was that we also built our whole platform ourselves. The whole coding is from ourselves. We set up everything immediately in quite a modern way. So we didn't have old sources with old data that was hard to reach. So quite soon we managed to get, like for the indirect tax, we created a report in our ERP system that we automatically share with one of the big fours who we outsourced our compliance to. So then for the big portion, you have a manually built report at once, but after that it's always creating the same columns, so we can easily share it with the big four, and they can prepare the returns based on that. I think my main pain point still in what we are currently doing is that even though the whole data sharing is automated, so that's of course really nice, we still are reviewing Excel sheets with comments on that we
working
put
papers
into. Whereas I would say that if we want to move to what the future should look like, we should have AI checking automatically what our results are, what our data is saying, and with flexible checks that can differ each month. So we are really ready for the future, because now I feel like the data is good, we're sharing it automated, but then the last step, like, was still in emails, sharing Excel sheets with comments.
Yes.
So.
And that's actually one thing that I want to ask Liz as well. When you were saying, like, look, at some point we have this internal process management tool that collects the data. Data should be accurate, is accurate in your case you mentioned. That's great already. And I think a lot of companies are not there, by the way. A lot of companies struggle with having accurate data. That raises a question. Maybe not for you two right now, but that's an issue. Like, okay, how do you handle that? But then you still need to, if you outsource it, at least throw it over to presumably the big four or a law firm. And then you get something back at some point. Do you see any issues there? Because I've seen in my own time and with current clients and other companies that we talk to, a lot of issues there. Not so much because any one of the parties is doing something wrong, but just because the nature of data exchange that is not machine to machine leads to issues.
We've been pretty lucky, but again, the tool that we built internally. So I worked like at Big Four for 16 years.
Yeah,
I came
so
in here. We looked at some tools externally. I wasn't wowed, I'm going to be honest. So we met with a group of engineers, and at the time, it was just something that was really of interest to them, like to build this entire process management system.
Yeah.
And what we did do was we've direct link with our outsource partner. So data comes in, and it's an outsource partner on that side. They do GL rec, etc. as part of month-end close. We take in what we call clean data. So we will only take the data once the reconciliation process has been done. Data comes into the portal. My team don't touch it. It goes straight to the Big Four. Big Four put it into their technology. They run the relevant checks that we require. Comes back in a pack. But Stefan, we are still doing what you said you're doing. We still have an Excel that we open up. And we only have, like, we have a set number of checks
adjustment
by the person. Yeah. That's on the bigger entities. But what we've done on the other side now is, because we've outsourced kind of like that second review process because of material risk and so on, we've built into the tool that when the person goes in from the COE, so we call them the COE, they're another one, another outsource partner. So there's like two firms independent of each other doing the review. We send it, but they actually have to go into the tool now and tick to make sure that they've done what we ask them to do each time they do a return. So we are in a very fortunate place, and we're more than aware of that. So we knew when we built the tool, it was exceeding expectation. Yeah. One of my favorite functionalities, and actually the engineers told me, Liz, it wasn't the hardest build in the world. We get this thing where we're constantly asked for invoices, revenue queries, the outsource partner wanting to check certain invoices. Yeah. So we built this functionality which directly collected to Oracle. You type in the invoice number. We don't even know this is happening. They type in the invoice number, pops the invoice, and is presented straight to them inside the portal. So again, it just helps us now better for audits, better for outsource partners. So we really only have to worry about the pack when it comes in. But I have seen situations where machine over to machine, but then human comes in back into us in a pack. So it has to come out of their machine, be converted. And there can be some issues there because it's not all hyperlinked.
Exactly.
So it's the easiest thing
Yeah.
always to reconcile. There is still manual, but that gives you opportunity. So that's how we look at things. Yeah.
And Steph, for you as well, is that like a similar process?
Yeah, so what I really like about what we have, so the basis is indeed that we have the automated data sharing, and then the results from the data will show up in the platform. I do have to reconcile the data each month to make sure it's all been done correctly. But after that, we have a live dashboard where we can see all of our data. And also all of our figures. And what is really relevant for us is that usually we have a partial exemption in the financial industry.
Yes.
We can see live if our pro rata percentage, for example, is still correct with what we assumed on the beginning of the year. So that's, for example, a big advantage.
Great validation.
We can automatically see if some the trend analysis, we can do it each month. So that's all been really nice. And then indeed, that's automatically sent out to all the local teams that are preparing the return. And then there's a review for us. We are doing as a tax team a correctness check, but we also have the financial controller still involved who will also do a completeness check on the reconciliation there.
Okay. So it's for both of you right now already a relatively low touch process, right? Where there's still human involvement, both on just to summarize it, on the inside, so internally as well as with the outsourcing partners that you have. Do you, Steph, you mentioned AI. Do you see a path, regardless of what technology, to a fully automated process?
I want this. Yeah. So I was actually looking last year into this because I feel like, in that regard, the VAT compliance shouldn't be that difficult. And at the end of the day, the system, if it all matches, then it's better for everyone. You have no risk. All the governments know what they're up to. That's like how the future for me looks like. Then the compliance part is totally not interesting anymore. That's what I would see. But then I was talking, I looked into some tools, and then I thought, then there's still a lot of manual stuff. You cannot have a direct connection with the local authority, so you cannot file it automatically from the system. And then you have to fill in manually these forms again, etc., etc. So I still feel like the world is not ready for it at all yet, but it should be, because VAT will be much more simple if we can get there. Yeah.
Can I jump in and ask a question from the audience that was being brought up about? And Liz, I'll let you throw a bucket of water over our enthusiasm in a second. But do you see then, Steph? Do you see the death of the VAT return coming along the way? Do you see that it's going to become fully automated?
Yeah, I think it makes sense from how the system works as well. I think it's quite weird to think that you can just fill in a random number in your VAT return and recover that amount if you would have bad intent, but that you can do it, and then it would work at first. You don't know if they're going to come. Nobody should do it, but people can still do it, and I think you wouldn't want that as any government, that it's still possible to do. So I think it's necessary for the system to match everything. And that this is the future if you look at what the VAT system is.
Okay, interesting.
Can I ask you just? Sorry, I'm going to ask a poll on this. I'll type it up just to see who's. By the end of the decade, do you think we'll see the death of VAT return or no? Yes. Or
yes.
No?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Liz is saying no. All right. I'm going to do a quick poll. You guys continue. I'm going to ask the audience just to see.
It's super interesting to see these opposing views on that, especially given that you're both working for leading technology companies, of course. I would side with Liz, by the way. I don't think we're going that fast. Having that said, I do think that we're going to make great strides towards that. And I think, if anything, the way we think about it, right? And I think, Steph, and Liz, what you mentioned earlier in terms of like the actual compliance work as well, I think we should all, as companies at least, strive to get compliance as automated as possible, as soon as possible, and then use that almost like a table stakes, like a base layer, right? On which you can then start to do more advanced things. And I think that's, Steph, where you mentioned, for example, dashboarding, it's called. I'm personally not a fan of dashboarding. I like more alerting. Why would I have to stare at the dashboard, right? It's better if the data comes to me. But I think that's where you really want to start talking about predictive technology. What can you do? What data insights can you unlock, right? That humans cannot. In terms of, we got a question on this. You already kind of like mentioned it before. you are still in this process, however low touch, outsourcing some of it, right? Co-sourcing, basically. You're doing some internally, some externally. How do you define that? Was that like a deliberate choice from the get-go? Like, hey, we want to outsource this for XYZ reason. Was there is there like a data-driven approach there? How do you think about that? What is the right decision or the way of thinking about it framework-wise for any company that's thinking about co-sourcing or outsourcing or insourcing?
For us, it's a must-have.
Okay.
When I joined Meta, it was here, and it will be here for the long term. Yeah, I think what I would say, though, kind of in the spirit of the conversation we're having, that doesn't mean that we're just willing to kind of say, okay, we're just going to put it over there. So, like, if you look at the area, and I refer to it as remote selling because that's what our internal term is. So this is like B2C, digital return, simplified return. When you look at that area, I do think you can literally automate it. Within probably, you can never have touchless. There's no such thing. There's always going to be a slight glitch, and you got to be ready for the glitch. So we'd say a 98% environment. And that's because it's static AOR data. It's got a single rate of tax on it. You should be able to verify it. Why would you send it over there to verify it? Verify it as part of month-end close, push it into whatever your compliance tool is. And then you may get to the point, which is what I would love, which is on remote selling. I'm like, I don't actually want you to do the return for me anymore.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
I've pulled my data. I've done my reconciliation.
Yes.
I know what my payment is. I can automate my journal, whether it be an FX journal or, a payment journal, whatever that might be. So that world for me, 100% can go automated end to end. And I can end up probably saying on that last mile, I don't have the team. I don't have the engineers that if the Ugandan website or whomever, because I don't want to pick on Uganda, we have a great experience with Uganda. If the website goes down, I can't come online to fix that problem. I can't expect mine. So it's very much that last mile. And as Meta, we've decided we don't want the last mile. We want to push it. So it's, do I move over? Could it be the next 6 months or 12 months to say, I want to do a full end to end? The benefit for that is, and this is what I love about VAT, if I transform this bit, by default, finance get a win, my treasury team probably get a win. I'm spending less, which even for Meta is a big factor for us as we look at efficiency and all the rest of it. But I do think that co-sourcing for us will always be very, very important because we don't want that last mile.
Got it. Yeah.
Just a quick update, guys. The folks, the poll came in. Steph, you and I will have a mission by the end of this decade. Unfortunately, 74% believe that the VAT return will still be alive and kicking, with only 26% backing the death.
There you go.
And can I give you what we're hearing? So the risks that we see are, it's not on the AOR side. Everybody knows you can automate AOR, and we're nearly suggest, like at the OECD level, you're nearly kind of nudging, but not really saying it out loud. You could probably automate AOR in the VAT return because we're going to be giving you the information electronically anyway. That makes sense. But the problem is intercompany. There's a complete lack of awareness of intercompany. So they think they're going to be able to do a VAT return, but the problem for us is the intercompany is only done after the books close. There's a cost plus element. It can take an absolute plethora of days before the invoice gets raised to get pushed into a VAT return that's due 2 days later. They don't know that because they don't do the returns. No,
you're right.
And the bigger risk we see is more on the AP side.
Yes.
So what you have is the invoice comes in electronically, but that doesn't mean that invoice has been processed. So now all of a sudden I've got an invoice that I can claim the VAT on because technically I have receipt of it. But the problem is then that my team reject it. And it's not me, it's someone like down in infra or over in advertising or over in marketing that rejects that invoice. Now you're looping in a manual process. Now I have to go back and get a credit note that has to come in the next time. You end up in this cyclical cycle. Now, if you whack blockchain on the top of that thing and bring in all the technology that we know is out there, we know you can get to seamless on AP, but it's just going to take time. And I see that as the risk. Intercompany, you can get there. It's just an awareness education process that needs to happen. And AOR, I don't think it's unreasonable to say they can go there, but to try and put all of that in at the same time.
Before the end of the decade?
Yeah.
It'll be hard.
I just worry it's too much. I do.
Yes. Before we're hitting all the buzzwords with block, I know we were hitting the blockchain one, but before you're moving on to that, are you guys using AI at all? Because this is coming in through the chat. Is there anything that you both would would mention on the topic of.
Before we go into that, Eiko, because that's
right.
a big one, right? That's almost like a rabbit hole on its own. I just wanted to hear from Steph how he thinks about like the strategy around insourcing, outsourcing, co-sourcing, if it's deliberate, and how you think about that long term as well.
Yeah, indeed, it's quite interesting because currently we have outsourced a lot, but we've talked about insourcing as well. So, especially as a highly regulated company, you want to have the most certainty you can get. Huh? We want to pay our fair share of tax, and we really don't want to take any risks. And then the question is it more secure to outsource or to insource? Definitely, we think we don't have separated compliance managers because we think it's good to touch the compliance still and to see what is happening in there if you're managing a certain region. And I think that's really valuable. But then I'm questioning, what is a Big Four actually doing for us? What more are they doing than just analyzing the data that's automatically shared with them, like we can do ourselves as well? So then it's more a time thing. So if you want to hire it more in-house, yes or no, but I don't really think it gives more certainty. So first you can think like, oh, you're outsourcing and this professional company is doing a lot for us, so it must be extra safe, we must be doing the right thing. I don't really know if that's the case. I do think that then still each manual step that you would have to take if you would do it in-house creates risk, and that's you would want to avoid. So if you can do it automated in-house, then I think it could work, but you just have to hire a little bit more people.
Yeah.
One thing I'll add as well on the outsourcing is you have to set the boundaries.
Yeah.
So like if we've got local entities, they do a lot of testing for us. That's what we want them for. So they are giving us value add, because I don't want my team looking at like ad hoc invoices to see are they deductible, non-deductible. There's certain trigger words that we have. So it's the value that you want them to bring. Now, that's why I would say remote selling to me is one that I don't see the value in the same way that Stefan is talking. No. So for me, you have to work out what it is you want from that outsource partner. And the direction will, dictate the kind of relationship you'll have with them. So
that makes perfect sense. Be very specific and be very deliberate is what I hear on what you actually want to get out of it.
KPIs are mission critical.
And
what I think as well with compliance is it's the same cycle over and over again. So it's repetitive work, mostly. You have to check the same type of stuff. And I don't know if humans are so good in that, to be honest. I think computers are better in repetitive work than humans because we easily get bored. Computers don't get bored, so that all plays a role here. So then I think it's safer to have more done by automated systems than by humans there.
Again, I think a lot of the outsourced partners are doing it by system.
Exactly.
They're putting it into a system and hitting keywords.
Exactly. Yeah.
But they're the things you have to check to see what are they doing, how are they going to do it, what comfort does it give you, and that's all around risk appetite and what your KPI system is going to be as well.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking, right? You have of course always your local requirements as well in terms of like fiscal representation that are out there, so that you just cannot circumvent anyway. But then I heard Liz earlier saying the most work still sits in the reconciliation. And I think that you kind of like were mentioning that similarly in the sense of like you have to do it or with the team internally as well, and you're reviewing. How do you think? Is there any room for optimization there in terms of where you started versus where you are today and where you're going? Like, what is the journey that you're on there to minimize that? Because I can imagine that even though very important, that's also not per se the type of work that you probably want to have everyone do.
So I suppose, again, as we try to move like the finance team particularly into value add and away from this mundane VAT, let's be truthful, what we obviously picked up on was in our larger entities, which have that full VAT footprint, APA or intercompany, etc. One of the areas is there is always going to be an element of non-deductible. I'm just sticking in a power cable in case anyone
go for it.
There's always that element of non-deductible. So what we realized was, okay, we don't want a person in finance coming into Indirect Tax Portal, which is what our tool is called, and having to like open a spreadsheet to go to a tab to find the non-deductible. So what we did then with the support of our outsource partner was we built basically a dashboard. And what it does is when they're doing month-end close now, they can see that the GL and the Vertex don't match. Those two figures are not matching, or the GL is not matching the VAT. How come? And they go in, and instead of having to do all this manual, open this, move to that, it's just there on the dashboard. Now, what we've also done is, again, because we didn't want those people doing it, we push that journal straight to another outsourced partner that we have. And the journals are done and they have a materiality variance. So if there's something very high, they will come back to the finance lead on that entity and say, "Ooh, this looks a bit high. Maybe you need to go check it." But again, you're kind of automating as best you can a process that was quite manual. And that's where we've gone on the kind of journal non-deductible side of things. We've tagged certain suppliers, which is the most basic thing you can do, to say, right, just block these all the time. So like you described, you're doing the same thing over and over, but we've such a diverse range of vendors, which is a good thing, and we're very proud of it. We don't have consistency. So we kind of have this rule that like 2 strikes and you're out. So if you're non-deductible twice, by default, you become tagged. And we have to set some kind of bar, because we can't look at that invoice every single month. It just becomes, you know, it's just not okay. And it's something we've kind of agreed with the business and moved on from. But they're the smaller things, but sometimes it's the 1%. I often exactly. Sport connotation. Sometimes it's the 1% that makes a difference. So every time we finish a project, we then start to look at what's the next
what
thing
else can we do?
Some small, low-hanging fruit, and then some of the bigger Gen AI type stuff that we would start looking at.
It's just looming, Gen AI. But before we go into AI, because it's coming up everywhere, right? We have to. How do you get to that? Because when you say low-hanging fruit, what I find interesting, I talk to a lot of companies that say, like, look, we wanna transform, right? We are here today, we want to get there. But where do we start, and how do we determine what's the most impactful? So in other words, Liz, and Steph for that matter, how do you determine within your respective organizations what that low-hanging fruit is that has the most impact? Is that data-driven? Is that just based on back of an envelope, like we feel that we spend a lot of time here? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think for us, we really have the OKR this year for the whole of group finance to try to save time of everyone. And the idea of that is that we really, per team, we made a pitch for the whole of group finance, how many hours we could save. And then we did a presentation for everyone with the reasons why we could save time. And we really sat together with the whole tax team, and we all came with these ideas. And then we said, how many hours are you working each month on this? And then we're counting it. And then you see,
like a brainstorm, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And if you then look at whole group finance, definitely, you can say, whoa, with this, we can save 500 hours. Yeah. We had a few of those projects already. And that's also a way, if you look at Gen-wide, and not only within tax or finance, how if you have that mindset of saving time and you look as a group bigger together, like how can we really save time, you can also reduce your necessary headcount. And that can save cost and
lean.
Have a really big impact, bigger than tax alone. So I really like that mindset. And one idea that we had for the VAT compliance in terms of reconciliation is that we have made automated worksheets where the trial balance and our indirect tax report are combined. So then one time we sit together with the financial controller to look into all these different elements of the trial balance that are relevant for the VAT return. And with this automated worksheet, we only have to change the dates, and then automatically we have it for a different month.
Steph, that was an exciting story, but unfortunately your internet failed on you. The system.
Oh no!
The system even automatically disabled your video. I haven't seen that before, so you must be in a really bad spot. Sorry. I hope it's not Adrian's office, by the way. But if I just were to summarize, what you're saying is, be very deliberate. Brainstorm about small projects that have a big impact. Try to expand it beyond tax alone, right? So look at the broader finance organization. That's where low-hanging fruit and big impact projects are. The last part, in terms of what you actually did with the template that you mentioned, maybe that's something that you can repeat when you're back. I think what I find interesting, and Liz, maybe you can answer that from your end, to what extent does these kind of like things that you guys are working on, which is really like, I would say cutting edge in many ways. There are not a lot of companies doing that. To what extent do you have executive, like in your case, probably CFO or head of finance or head of tax support? How big of an agenda item is this for you from a corporate strategy perspective?
I am super lucky at Meta because I was here, I think, about 8 months, and the then head of finance was based in MPK, and my boss as well, who's been an amazing support in anything that we've done. They kind of brought me to MPK and we were talking about this environment and how, compliance wasn't probably where it needed to be for a company that was moving from the status of a startup into what was become. We couldn't use the word startup after a while.
Yeah.
It was going to wear a little thin as we became a monster with trillions of dollars of revenue. And we thought about scale and we thought about legislation, and we could see this absolute wave, because I use Tsunami now for e-invoicing, but that was probably the previous tsunami of compliance coming at us. And I remember having a conversation coming out of the room and being in a bit of a state of, oh my God, what have I done? Which was, Liz, if you went crazy, what would you do? And then we started looking at building this internal process management tool. And that was a huge lift for us. Now, what I would say now to anybody is there's loads of outsource opportunities for products like that now. Yeah. We didn't probably have that same, it just mightn't have been where we needed to be 8 years ago. And 8 years ago, a long time. Stefan's going to say something like I was still in college back then and make me feel 105. But like in tech terms, it's a long time. Yes, so things have changed. There's partners out there now that have a lot of this in a nice package. It's not a plug and play, but it's there. Yeah. So that was, huge support. And I think over the years, because we've always done things with the finance team globally, cross-functionally, using treasury, whatever, people have just learned to trust us. So now when, like even recently, we met with an amazing group of stakeholders and kind of said, I just want to kind of show you something. And it's this kind of automation on the remote side. And they all just kind of went, looks great, because they trust us now. But that takes time. And you've got the biggest piece of advice I can give you is we can all come up with ideas, but if you cannot implement them and you cannot actually get to the finish line, then eventually people will stop listening to you. Yeah. So don't take on the biggest thing you think. Sometimes you need to break it down. And like if I had said to someone 6 or 7 years ago, Liz, where do you want to go? I'd say what I'm saying, like maybe next year, where I literally don't want to have to touch remote selling anymore. Yeah. It's going to go straight into a machine. We're going to verify it. We're going to do a month-end close automatically. We're going to pay it ourselves. But it's taken me and a whole team of amazing people here at Meta 6 years to do that. And we're still not there because Gen AI is now coming and we're looking at that and what could that do for us? Yeah. But take your time, because one, it's important to have, a little something every year to showcase what you've done for yourself and your team. But it does take time, and if you run too fast, you could fall over, and it's sometimes a little bit hard to get back up again.
Bite off too much. Yeah, makes sense. I'm also thinking, Liz, and just as a nuance to what you're saying, I can imagine that for you specifically, or for the company specifically, the scale is so vast, as you mentioned yourself as well, and clearly also from an overall market cap perspective, that it probably is unique in many ways, in the sense that I can imagine that most companies will not even be able to build themselves for lack of resources, for lack of budget, for lack of scale, right? It's like building your own power plant. There's just no logic to that per se, especially not if there's, to your point, vendors out there that can actually do that. Steph, I don't want to withhold you, Steph, from your earlier, which sounded very exciting achievement. Maybe you can share it once more.
Yeah, sure. I hope you hear me well now.
Yes, back.
Okay, that's great. So I'm on a hotspot now. It works better than the office Wi-Fi, apparently.
Turns out, yeah.
So we have an automated worksheet where we can combine the data from the trial balance with our indirect tax reports. And what is the result of that is that one time the tax manager has to sit together with the financial controller to look at the specific situation, because each country will have different trial balances, different elements to it. And then only one time you have to make sure that you can match the data. And then from then on, you only have to edit the live data. So then you can always use the same sheet. So the reconciliation for a lot of countries is fully automized now. So that's really nice.
That's very cool. Yes. What I wanted to ask you, by the way, before, and I promised after that, we will talk about AI.
Holding the best for last year.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we just have to. So, and I get that. But in terms of the actual indirect tax compliance process, right? We've talked about remote selling. We've talked about the process of reconciliation. In terms of like the non-remote selling, predominantly, of course, other than Taiwan, when we talk about e-invoicing, digital reporting, and the reconciliation between that part of your reporting flow and your ultimate indirect tax periodic reporting, so your VAT, GST returns, basically. How do you think about that? How does that work? How connected is that? How much manual work is involved there still?
Yeah, so from our side, we have a lot of countries where the e-invoicing requirements are there already or soon are going to be applicable. What we notice is that our KYC onboarding processes, which are very extensive for a company like us, that they usually don't ask for information yet that is suddenly required with e-invoicing.
Yeah.
So then you have all these merchants onboarded from the past, but we don't have the necessary items to even issue an e-invoice. So then what do you have to do? Do you really have to contact all those merchants to get that one data item that was not even required on a regular tax invoice? So that's where it all starts. So that's what we see in a lot of countries. Each country has their own template. And my ask to the European Commission would be like, please make at least one format for EU so we can have at least one time that we know which items we have to ask. So I do think e-invoicing is a lot of work. Yeah, a lot of time.
What is that one data item, if I may ask, that you're leaving out normally that you now have to ask for?
Yeah, so for example, in Italy, there's an SDI code that we need to have. That's, for example, one. In India, I don't know which ones exactly. I would have to ask my colleague, but there are a lot of there. So those type of examples.
Yeah. We also see, by the way, a lot of people don't even realize this, that you have to, of course, validate indirect tax IDs before you report. And a lot of companies struggle with master data in that respect. They just don't have it. It's not complete. It's not accurate. Or even if it's there, numerically it's not validated, so then when you start reporting you kind of scratch, if that makes sense.
But now we're seeing countries who want banking details and logistics information,
exactly,
which don't even sit in our billing system.
I can throw you another one just to add on to some more into this as while we're all complaining about the topic. You can also have the data, you could have collected it, you even got the right data point, but because you've included, for example, in Mexico, the legal entity type, and you're trying to push that through to the system, you need to actually strip it out before you report it. So you might have done everything perfectly, but just you might have included a space at the end, and that will throw it off in some of the e-invoicing and digital reporting systems.
Yes. I'm trying to remember, but I'm going to do discredit to somebody who sits at the OECD. He's part of a telco, and when they were doing the go live in India. Do you remember this session?
I know exactly what you're saying. And
and they had to hire like 400 outsource people. So like, an outsource partner, 400, they had to work for 4 months to clean the data before it could be used for e-invoicing in India. And you can imagine the cost of that. But it's those, now I don't hold me to it because not Liz's number, but I remember that everybody in the room was just shocked. It was like, that is an awful lot of people and money. And again, we're always kind of saying, any of us who are lucky to be there, and we do try as best we can to represent companies. We're not there as like Liz of Meta. It's like you're there to represent businesses, and you are trying to say to them, look, you've got to realize that companies are doing their best here. And as a tax authority, we're trying to do our best. But at the end of the day, Meta's business is to sell advertising. It's not to make sure that every person that comes onto the platform is fully tax compliant.
No, it's not.
But as we look at CSOP and DAC 7 and everything else that's coming at us, we had this thing that was mentioned a number of years ago at an event I attended, and it was platforms are best placed. And it's stuck in my head ever since, because you do feel like you're ending up in the middle now between the relevant taxpayer and the tax authority. So the ask is now, if you have to start working with us more. We're here. We want to have conversation with you. Mm-hmm. We know the ship has sailed, so please come and talk to us so that we can understand the landscape, so that you can understand what an intercompany is and the impact of it and how our AP processes work. And we want to educate, like we don't want to hide anymore. We're very much in the room. We want them to work with us. And if they did it, I do think this could be better in the long term. And we do see a lot of this around kind of Africa and that region right now, where they're bringing in a lot of this digital service kind of legislation and taxation of digital services.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. On the payment side, Steph, I think you guys are probably not automating that yet. As in, I hear Liz saying that, but you didn't say like, oh, we do. Imagine that there's still manual, which is normal. I think most companies don't do that, by the way. Liz, because you're doing it, I'm just so curious. How do you deal with currency exchange?
The system is set up that it knows what currency to run in. But the problem we have is that obviously our books are done in US dollar, or if it's an Irish entity, it can be done in euro. So you do a fluctuation on currency. And at the moment, that is still manual.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's manual. I was
Yeah,
not,
and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the bit that
yeah.
if
It's the
you
hard
do this
one.
kind of full end-to-end automation,
Yeah.
that's the last bit you're capturing. So the global automation project is probably coming to a point where we can now start saying, okay, we're kind of done there.
Yeah.
But ramping up the next part. But what happens in every company is the product has been such a success, for tax payments,
Yeah.
that we've loads of other payments.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Sometimes we get like, oh, just keep doing that one manually for a while we go over
Yeah.
here, because that's a bigger problem.
The bigger one. Yeah.
And that's okay. So that can
okay.
happen, and it's probably happening right now, where we're looking at other manual payments and can we use this technology that we've built for tax for potentially other areas of the business.
Which is really amazing, because then as a tax function, all of a sudden you have a broader than tax impact as well on the business. Just like Steph mentioned on the finance side, savings, coming up with ideas. I think that's very good for us all. In terms of AI, let's just very quickly touch upon it. Steph, you mentioned earlier, like, wouldn't it be amazing if AI does like the reviewing for us and does X, Y, Z? I just want to, from my perspective, right? I've been talking to a lot of people about this recently, actually. First, setting the stage, right? When we talk about AI has been around forever, just not in a Gen AI form, right? But machine learning and algorithmic comparisons and querying, of course, has been there for a longer time. That's also what tax authorities are investing so heavily in right now. I think that is going to be the first real application in the indirect tax compliance process, as in not the Gen AI side of things yet, but the first layer of just utilizing clean data, structured data by machine learning. Is that how you guys think about it as well? I mean, Liz, you probably already do that in a way, if you're talking about clean data and having everything also automatically reconciled.
Yeah, indeed. No, I fully agree. I think that's definitely the way to go. We are not utilizing it in that way yet, but we definitely have to, in terms of some requirements that are up and coming for us. But I do think that as well, we have seen some tools now that can make like a story about your financial statements, for example. So those financial statements are analyzed for the past few years, and then automatically a story rolls out about this was different about this year, and this was interesting fact about 2023, for example. I think those type of tools are really nice, because you don't even have to analyze it yourself if you can really trust on the system, of course.
Oh, that's an important one.
You only have to push in the data. You get like a nice summary of what is specific. So those type of things, I think, could be super valuable for VAT compliance, because it's always the same cycle each month.
Got it. So you're more thinking about it from, for example, financial statements, disclosures, potential like boilerplate language that you would want to provide to folks. Or do you actually expect? Yeah, or do you actually expect Gen AI to tell you, like, hey, Steph, I think that in this large pool of data, this is what you want to look at, or are you thinking like a chatbot, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so I would say that AI can automatically put in red flags, orange flags, or green flags, right? If you had that in the system, that it rolls out automatically from your system, then that's that. But also, it would be even nicer if you have a small story, like a side note to this, like, oh, we saw these type of errors. This was interesting about this month. We also saw that you had a little bit less sales. Is that to be expected? Those type of stuff. And I know it's possible. So I think a combination of both. Yeah.
Liz, what do you have for us on AI, if anything, that you want to share publicly?
We're probably really just kind of, I kind of feel, for me, in certain areas, particularly on the consulting side, like that real technical stuff, I feel like AI is still a bit at the area which, again, I know about, where the internet used to plug in and it made that weird noise before it connected.
Yes.
Because a lot of the information is kind of held behind firewalls and stuff. But what we're doing here is we have a thing called Metamate. So we have, as you know, Mark recently announced Llama, etc. So we have an internal Gen AI environment that we can kind of play around with. So the team do it all the time. And what I've told them is, guys, the future is scripting. It's knowing how to ask the machine the right questions. So in order to do that, you're going to have to use this thing. Ask it silly questions, see what kind of answer it gives you. So we have done some, what is the VAT rate of? We did some work actually using CSOP. That was particularly negative. It never heard of CSOP, because what we then figured out was the dump for what we use internally, Metamate, was, say, done around like late 2021, 22. There wasn't really a lot of talk about CSOP then. So it gave us a plastic bag levy in Germany or Poland, whichever country it was. So the team are seeing, okay, it's not quite there. I need to be super careful of this. We've seen case hallucination.
Yeah.
But then when I look at it on the other side, around the compliance side, I can get quite excited. So I'm like, we've tried a couple of really small things, kind of working with people who go, let's just mess around with that and see what we can figure out.
See what we can do.
We've tons of data because of Tableau reports, like how many returns, what was sales, and some people don't like dashboards. They're complicated. If you're not visual, they don't like them. So we could build like a little bot. And you type into the bot, which country had the largest sales? Do you see any fluctuation? And as we trained it more and more and more, it became quite good. And it was super interesting to watch. But it does take effort. We're definitely looking at it from a withholding tax perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And the other area I'd say that we look at over the next probably 6 to 12 months, and I think is more the focus for me, is on the AP side.
Yeah.
So like pulling the data from the invoice, ship to, ship from. Biggest issue we would probably have is like single vendor dispatching goods from locations all over the place. And how do I make sure they're applying the right treatment? And can I have a red flag or a green flag or a yellow flag, whatever it might be, amber? That's the kind of stuff I probably interests me a lot, and it's just seeing what people are doing with it. So we're still looking at it, but it's big. And it will be big.
I'm going to quickly publish a poll, guys. You go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're clearly, Steph, just as an FYI, we're also working on it. We're embedding AI wherever we can, because it makes sense, right? But there are these considerations that Liz is saying, and that's why I believe, and Liz, actually what you're saying fits that quite well. I think the first layer is really the machine learning layer, making sure that you can do something with the data from an analytics perspective. And then the second layer is almost like the composite AI, as they say these days, where you have a chatbot on top that can potentially query that underlying data, but does not necessarily come up with its own. So it's not Gen AI in the sense of it's a large language model, right? It's NLP, human language, but it's not generating its own results, because then you end up what Liz is saying, which I think is a very fair one, and not something that we like in tax: uncertainty and risk in terms of hallucinations. When it comes to AI, our tax team is using it. Oh, this is an interesting one. I'll skip. Interesting. It's a very, very interesting one. Okay. Thank you both. I wanted to ask one more thing on the overall kind of like lay of the land, how you see it changing, and what it means from a people perspective. You both have the privilege, like you mentioned yourself, to work in these amazing companies. Do you feel that people in-house functions today, regardless of whether that's in like the front runner tech technology or tech company side of things, or just more traditional, need to upskill or need to focus on tax automation, technology, and things like that? And if so, what would you recommend them?
Yeah, from my perspective, I 100% think the focus should be there. From my point of view, the role as a tax manager of the future is that you also are able to automate. Me, myself, we discussed a little bit about this before we started. I would like to learn to write a little bit of coding because I think it's just really important that you are ready for what's coming in the future. And I think just the technical thinking about VAT laws is not going to get you to that point anymore where you need to be to keep up with the others and to keep up with all the requirements from governments. So I think it's totally necessary. And we have a full focus on automation of all of our processes as the whole tax team.
Got it. So it's a big topic, the overall tax transformation in that sense, digitization. And
for us, 100%. Yeah.
Liz, what are you doing? Or what is your team doing, or what are folks doing across the board?
We always say to the team, think outside the box.
Okay.
So even on, like you've just got so much information available to you when you sit in indirect tax, and I think some people underestimate that. Yeah. We're kind of supposed to be this quiet, incidental tax. Most people will know I'm not very good at being quiet. So we're focused very much on using the technologies that's there, constantly thinking, what can we do better? Constantly road mapping. So there is a question in about like, I'm literally just getting through my compliance. Where am I going to get time to do the projects? But it's amazing how much you can do in a really short space of time. As in, like, we as a team, once the compliance is done, we would often just take a couple of hours in a particular day. And some of us will even decide to come in a bit early, or we might decide we're going to work a bit late, and then we go for dinner and we make it into something. And we do that. We brainstorm. We literally say, right, and we only did it about a week ago because we were kind of looking at 2024, and one of the entities is, is a little more technically difficult. We're like, okay, what do we do there? And it's just letting everyone get in the room and whiteboarding. And that's the biggest thing is I am not a tax technology person. I am a VAT person who has a passion for transformation and a passion for policy. I have amazing engineers who can code all day long, and that's just not my thing. And I'm old enough to be comfortable with that. But what I say to the younger members of the team is Gen AI is going to be such a huge part of your life. And I'm doing it myself, where you need to learn how to prompt, because we would have people where English isn't their first language.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how it's not a good thing, but it's so difficult. It's an extra layer of complexity to get the right question in there answered. They come and they're like, this, it's not answering the question. And then I look and I go, okay, you're saying it kind of correctly, but it's answering what you're asking. It's maybe articulation.
Yeah.
It's an awful thing to explain to somebody.
Yeah.
But it's the Gen AI thing is
prompt engineering skills are,
it is. Right. But I also love the idea that some of the team want to take that step. They want to do Alteryx training. Some of them are even going back and doing Six Sigma, which is I did centuries ago. But it's still important to have that
relevant.
Project management, etc. But the biggest thing you've got to have to do any of this is support from the people around you, because you can't do it on your own. And
I imagine that like skills that follow from, for example, Six Sigma are very helpful now when it comes to e-invoicing projects as well, right?
Yeah.
I think in general, if I hear you both correctly, what you're saying is like, look, there is absolutely a need and probably also a desire for most people to stay apprised of what's going on, new technologies, stay up to date, at least know what's going on. You don't have to be an expert in it, but at least know and keep yourself up to date. And secondary, if I hear you, Liz, correctly, and I think Steph will probably agree, it is also about leveraging those around you that have those specific skill set, which I find super interesting because it also plays into what we see, broadly speaking, I think, in VAT, especially with e-invoicing, digital reporting, that it is becoming a more broader business topic, right? Where traditionally tax was far more seen as an isolated topic, of course, like a back office item, whereas now it's becoming like top of mind for a lot more functions outside of tax. So why not then leverage those skills there as well?
And I know some companies that do, but I don't own e-invoicing. I actually am just a stakeholder.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's also an interesting one. Yeah. Like who owns e-invoicing versus, that's an interesting one. We're not going to have time for it all today, but maybe next time. I know we probably have some questions that are unanswered from folks in the chat or even in our one-on-one messages. We will answer them afterwards. We'll follow up with all of you and give you proper answers that we didn't discuss now. For now, I want to really thank both Liz and Steph for their time. It's super appreciated by everyone, by the way. And every time we hear this as feedback, like that people from industry are actually sharing their experiences, their real life examples, and just lessons learned with the rest of the tax community. I think it's super valuable because fortunately for you, but unfortunately for others, not everyone has the ability to work for these amazing companies and go through these brilliant journeys that you're going through. So thanks a lot for that. It's always a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to a next time. And have a wonderful day, everyone, wherever you may be.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.